I am so thrilled to be here, and I'm glad that you have welcomed me here this morning. You know, I was thinking about the bios, and I'm glad that they're not lengthy, but I was actually reflecting on my self, because in some ways I see myself as a book. I was sort of squished between two bookends, my mom on one side, my dad on the other, and my mom over here with making me understand this value-infused poetry, because she wanted to, I guess, influence me early about diversity and justice, and she would say, stand straight, and the mountain and the squirrel had a quarrel, and the former called the latter little prig, and Button replied, you were doubtless very big, but it takes all kinds of things in weather to make up a year in a sphere. If I can't carry trees on my back, neither can you crack a nut. Then I had my father on the other side, and he was the product of a segregated South, and he was so fiercely positive and determined that success could occur with just getting through those barriers of life. And so he would say to me, baby, when you put your head down on the pillow at night, ask yourself what you learned today. And if the answer is nothing, you have wasted the day. So I come to you with feeling like a book. You know, you'll find that I'm an entrepreneur and a bunch of other things, but I would love to just sort of bring you into my space and see what I present through the eyes that reflect my experience. So with your indulgence, I'll begin. Black. 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 Don't close your eyes to see it. Open them. Open your eyes to blackness. Blackness. See it. Feel it. All its contours. Even that old baggage of the negative charge, black, gloomy, dark, evil, impure. Know how it signifies beyond color, to call forth and name the flip side to white, which also signifies far beyond color. White. White. Whiteness. You feel it. You know it. Its power buried so deeply in our language, our histories, that we can barely name it, only sense it all around us and live it, no matter who we are in relation to it. The North Star whiteness. Purity. Goodness. Joy. Its meaning, like all words, contingent upon its opposite. And we know joy because we know sorrow. We know clean because we understand dirt, and we know honor because we know disgrace. 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 The state of blackness, reinforced over nearly 6 centuries of language, of representation, of art, of politics, policies, black people, black life, defined and sorted at a barrel of a gun, the end of a whip, snapped by white people to enslave and exploit the others. The arrangement of language reveals through those deep definitions baked right in. And for while the truth of racist harm is everywhere visible, as Amanda Gorman implored, if only we can see it. And that's we, you and me. We are all of us caught like shades in Plato's cave, inside the projection of a collective dream, a story of progressive freedom and equality, the story that tries to give the lie to what is right before our very eyes. I am black, and I dare say I am proud. I am of the blackness that draws energies, light, color unto itself and absorbs it all, only to call forth tapestries of being and belonging, and I speak from my rich heritage of blackness today when I talk about the ways of seeing that lead to ways of acting for change. With great urgency, I invite you. Dig deep. Cultivate that activist mind, which is not just about acting, after all. At least that's what I've learned. Before knowing how to act, I first had to train my mind to perceive and acknowledge all the truths, even the most ugly, violent, and unspeakable truths, especially the truths muzzled inside that progress narrative, unheard and unhealed. But remember what Freud said about the repressed, that it will return? Remember what Shakespeare told about truth, that it will out? Isn't that just what's happening right now? The national reckoning, launched by the murder of George Floyd. Our insistence that not one more generation have its Emmett Till, Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, and George Floyd. Not one more. In fact, that's what Isabel Wilkerson meant when she asked us to think about America as an old house with flaws we ignore at our peril. The return of the repressed, the outing of the truth, whether you keep on pretending or not. That old American house, built precisely to spec and then denied as such. The red lines of every ghetto, slum, or bad neighborhood willfully misread as evidence of the culture of the people forced to live inside them. Sign and reassuring symbol of blackness as calamitous, condemned. The idea that place reflects culture, which in turn reflects the values and mettle of the individuals who collectively make it, is precisely what the great activist and my dear friend Mel King revealed and resisted when he pitched Tent City in the middle of what was then becoming our modern Copley Square, one of the toniest neighborhoods in Tony, Boston. The very same Boston that was just then flexing its whiteness in the name of building a mall. Copley Place, the mixed-use luxury mall, had already disrupted communities and households, and the proposed parking garage next door would displace more black people and brown people to where? Follow planning language from red line to blight to flight to return to redevelopment. And you will find not only to gentrify, but also to disappear, to displace. If data is an indicator, then the answer is no, because the few studies we have showing levels and locations of displacement still do not capture whether people who were priced out, raced out, or pushed out ended up in other local housing, in a friend's spare bedroom, in the streets, or somewhere else altogether. So when I tell you that it was a visual politics of place that Mel King staged when he led the movement that built Tent City at the corner of Dartmouth and Columbus in Boston's South End, I mean that he fully understood the power of presence, of people. He mobilized blackness in the public square to protest its disappearance. And I mean the full range of blackness, especially that kind of blackness cordoned off from the white spaces repressed within the ghettos and slums that Jack built, invisible to the very day. Mel King was a teacher, planner, and activist whose strength started and finished with the power of the we, which is to say the ability of the collective to reclaim power from oppressive forces. And so he did when he activated hundreds of black Bostonians and thousands of supporters to build a temporary city on land slated for the parking garage, a city that represented the lives and dignity of those whose dwellings were actually at stake. Tent City, as he called it, opened with a joyful community build of wooden shanty houses and convening spaces as blackness entered the public square in all its sensory magnificence. and stayed and sang and ate and drank, black people, black dwellings, black food, black music filling the air. Even still, I must acknowledge that Mel's movement was not successful, not in the way that he immediately wished, that black people would retain their homes, but he was successful in other ways, one that directly benefited yours truly in a gesture of what we now call allyship. Tent City happened in 1968. And fast forward now to the early 1980s, and Mel King is still out there. Yes, he is. Protesting against displacement of black people. Now in the context of Boston's racist uprising against the federal mandate to integrate our schools, which in Boston meant busing. Now this time, Mel agreed to end his protest on the condition that a number of black businesses be given office space in, you guess where, Copley Place. And as I even reflect on his success then, I'm still saddened by how Copley Place responded, because of those businesses that became part of Copley Place, most were ghettoized on a side street, Dartmouth Street. And only few, because I still want to figure out how I managed to get inside what I call the main house, the big house, where other white businesses were located in the towers, these white businesses that flourished, and that's where I landed. So you see, even the execution of that success, in my humble opinion, could be better. You see. I mean, do you see what I mean? I mean, and frankly, though I had the credentials, though I had the revenue, I could not have gotten into Copley without Mel King. I just couldn't have. So when the doors opened for me, I went through them. Oh, yes, I did. Even though I was not made to feel that I belonged, nor that I would feel safe. And I'll tell you why. Because Boston planned, as I say, to integrate its school systems by busing some black children to white schools and vice versa, and a war of whiteness rose up in response. I saw that with my own eyes. But if you need some confirmation of it, the Boston Research Center reports that bused children were jeered, menaced, and periodically attacked. Many students suffered from stress, fear, and illness as a result. You know, I saw pictures of white mothers from South Boston singing Bye Bye Blackbird to black children as they were bused into that part of town. And I've got to tell you that it was such a horror for me to think of black children being taunted and enduring that kind of pain, and frankly to think that we as black people were the objects of that kind of hatred, which continues today. When I strode through those doors, it was because I wanted to take a gamble on myself and a gamble on the racist city of Boston to show that I could succeed anyway. And so I did, with the help of Mel King. And so I'm here to ask, what was it about him that opened the door for someone like me? And what was it about me that I could see how that opportunity for my own visibility could benefit other members of my community? You know, how did Mel King use the landscape to change the landscape? Was it the specter of people putting their bodies on the line? Or was it the visual reference to place, to home, to the right of all citizens to a livable life? A visual demonstration of what it actually means to destroy already precarious homes. Whatever the reason, the garage was finally built. That was finally built. Parks, yes, some Copley Place cars, but mostly those owned by residents of Tent City apartments. The low and moderate income residence made with all its permanence of brick and stone and named for Mel King's protest, that the Boston Globe claims knitted white Back Bay and Copley to more residential black South End, Mel King truly changed the landscape. He also helped me cultivate an activist's mind, which we heard takes courage and you have to stand up, capable of perceiving and acknowledging all the truths, like this one that Mel King also helped me understand. As a light-skinned black woman with degrees from Harvard and Boston College, I could be one of those black-owned businesses that got into Copley, that I may be more easily admitted to the tower section of that luxury mall, while others with darker skin, different accents, and different life opportunities remained excluded. Surely this audience is full of people positioned to help us do just that as you go about planning, designing, managing, and nurturing the built and natural environments. Perceiving and acknowledging all the truths might even instigate the redesign of a field of landscape architecture itself, which suffers from the same repressions and exclusions as American history at large. Kofi Boone notices that mainstream landscape architecture relegates critical black landscapes to historic preservation, cultural anthropology, and archaeology. Why can they not be read as landscape architecture? Why indeed? Well, for one, persisting racial inequities are clearly seen in the field. Note the glaring whiteness of the 66% and the stark evidence of the exclusion in the 1% of landscape architects who are black. And as with any of our systems, we ask, well, how did it get this way? Now, one answer comes from a recent ASLA study that shows nearly 1/3 of all landscape architecture students paid for their education from their savings, and almost 60% were able to rely on family to fund their education. Understanding the wealth gap in this country reveals how the cost of education determines or blocks access. And I hope this kind of data fuels your fire, the power you have, literally, to move mountains for change. Still, blackness has been there in the landscape itself and in landscape design and architecture all along. Not only in the presence of black people in their contributions to land, built environments, and beauty, but in the lineage of the profession, its structural relation to advocacy and justice. Though the field may appear to divide non-political landscape practice from social advocacy and reform, in fact, the two were married from the start in the expansive life of Frederick Law Olmsted. Olmsted never saw landscape design as separate from his long-standing activism against slavery, which he developed as a journalist sent south to report on that peculiar institution. Olmsted wrote 3 volumes of observations of the slaveholding South, collected in the Cotton Kingdom in 1861. Pondering this, I invite you in the spirit of landscape as activism, instead of focusing on Olmsted's exquisite parks and promenades, really think about his life. That's what makes him an activist, even as he remains a revered master of the art and science of landscape architecture. It was only after intense observation that Olmsted, like any good activist, was prepared to act when the opportunity arose, building the Port Royal Training School to support thousands of newly emancipated people from the Confederate Army after the Confederate Army left. And as depths tend to give the lie to surfaces, so the perception and even organization of landscape architecture as a field catering to the elite and complicit with our current segronomics obscures the complexity of practice handed down through generations, starting with Olmsted, and encompassing those whom we gather today to honor, like Cornelia Oberlander, who identified the longing for nature as the center of her work, designing housing projects so that people could have a better place to live, designing with the environmental stewardship in mind way back when the habit of disposability was just being cemented. Activist Cornelia Oberlander refused to not see what she saw. She refused to keep quiet about it. And landscape activist Cornelia Oberlander acted to mitigate the worst and change for the best. And most especially, she fought tooth and nail to protect even the smallest spruce tree. And now, that is the sister that Mel King could get behind. If you know what I mean. Because like Mel King, Cornelia Oberlander cared about the smallest and the least, along with all the rest. Mel insisted upon dignity for all those he represented, and this is the heart of activism. And hers. And Julie Bargman's, as far as I can tell. If ever I was to recognize a queen, I have to think it would be the Queen of Slag, first honoree of the Cornelia Oberlander Prize, inaugurating the heritage of the prize itself, which is meant not only to elevate public exposure of the discipline, but also to examine the state of landscape architecture through the lens of a specific practitioner or team, to perceive and acknowledge the state of the field through the lens of Julie Bargman and her dirt studio, to perceive what is before us, acknowledge its layers of truth, multiple and messy though they are, and though they may implicate us, claim it, all of it, as worthy of attention and care, reuse elements when we can, transforming them when we cannot. We can apply the same lens to places like Julie Bargman does, and to people too often treated as disposable in the very same way. Julie perceives how things are deeply, often invisibly connected, a practice that connects her with my dear friend Trey Trahan, the final activist I will describe this evening, or morning. When I first met Trey, he was exploring how to reclaim and re-engineer another kind of toxic site, live oak, a former plantation located in West Feliciana Parish in southeast Louisiana, that he had purchased with an eye to historic preservation of the house and conservation of the land. You know, Trey talked passionately about healing the soil. He said, we can treat the soil as an inert form, the ground we stand on, or we can connect through reverent attention with its teeming life, its life-giving properties, and about how that work is connected to healing humans and communities. He says, in the same way we have treated other humans as property, as bodies without souls, minds, and hearts. Unafraid to confront this truth and to act upon it, Trey continues the work of historic restoration, preservation, and conservation while expanding his focus to include archaeology, ethnobotany, ethnography, forensic investigation, genealogy, landscape architecture, and justice work. The role of my consultancy, Jane's Way, is to direct the racial justice aspect of the Live Oak Truth, Witness, and Justice Project, brought into being to connect with reverent attention to that experience of harm that Trey perceived and acknowledged, and to surface what remains life-giving from within its legacies. Trey is a living example of architecture as activism. Peace architecture, as he calls it. And so when I look at him, and all he has taken on at Live Oak, it reminds me of that time that I stepped through a set of doors that was far bigger than me. Trey has all the courage and confidence to use the landscape to heal the landscape, and the commitment to offer Live Oak as a site for the required next step of our activism, so long overdue in our American story, holding ourselves collectively accountable for healing this land and the people who live on it. Trey says, we hold ourselves responsible for justice. Live oak, its past enduring in the age of the trees, in the shape of the ground that reveals its use over time, in the woods and fields, floodplain and bluff, and the old Angola road that Trey's preservation efforts uncovered as an ancient byway of the Tunica people, now a roadway linking Live Oak north to the domestic slave trading markets of Natchez and south to the global ports of New Orleans. And you know, I saw it all. This northern girl, with her roots in the segregated South, I saw the plantations lining the river road between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, and I saw the burning towers and flaring stacks, a toxic skyline alongside the pastoral fields, the curving river, formerly dubbed Plantation Alley. This road is now well known as Cancer Alley, arguably this country's bullseye of environmental racism, a subject that I exhort all of you activists to think about. Along this alley, I saw Black people, homes and communities, most of them rooted in the spatial arrangements begun under slavery. Those same Black families now endure toxic air and water on the same land where their ancestors had been enslaved and exploited. If we return to where we started with Mel King's stand against Black people being forced out of their dwellings, I have to ask, what about those forced to stay? Not only in the old plantation landscapes, but the urban ghettoscapes too. Cancer Alley, where people continue to live in the quarters, where smokestacks are raining fire on their heads and pouring toxic dust into the air around them, and they can't leave. And if they were able to move out, winning the lottery with cash in their hands, they still have to contend with racism. And even still, we rise. And you will rise, designing and protecting our cherished landscapes, natural and built, insisting upon keen perception, authentic acknowledgement of the truth, however hard, and relentless, joyous action for change. You can take the case of anti-Blackness that I have spun today and apply it to any other state of othering or ism you can think of, and then go on to build a world of recognition and belonging for all humans, non-human species, and the earth. And remember my mentor and friend, Mel King, who lived the antidote to all the pain we see arrayed around us. Yes, lived it, as he showed us that love is the greatest renewable resource. Thank you.